and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but at times
let's go.
one might be inclined to feel like everybody's colluding, to just keep us hooked into the system, and I just
what is typically popular within the health space that people deem pretty healthy that you're just like, it might be all right, but I just choose to avoid it?
Yeah.
Artificial sweeteners use seems to be one of those things, right?
Yeah, but again, I think it's like a values thing. It's not even necessarily
values
a data driven thing. Like I had Lane on my podcast recently, and I'm totally aware of his stance on artificial sweeteners, and I'm and I asked him about them, and I was like, full disclosure, I don't consume them, but what does the data say? And he shared what he typically shares on that topic. But yeah, I mean, I personally sweeteners. I'll use stevia, monk fruit, the occasional sugar, alcohol, things like that. And that's not. I'm not saying that artificial sweeteners are bad or anything. They're not inert though. I think there was a study that even he shared that just came out that showed that compared to stevia, it was sucralose, and I think there was one other that did show a glycemic effect. I don't remember the specifics. And it does shift the microbiota. I mean, everything you eat shifts the microbiota. So I'm not, but they're not inert is the thing. And a lot of these food products that didn't exist, 60 years ago, we're still living in that experiment is what I think it's important to be mindful of.
Yeah.
And so I take what's called the precautionary principle approach. It's an actual, it's an actual philosophy where if you don't, not having all the data, first of all, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So just because you don't yet have proof of something, err on the side of, I think, caution. And with some of these newfangled products, I think the approach should be guilty until proven innocent, as opposed to innocent until proven guilty. There's also a lot of instances where, products are foisted onto the market, only later having to be recalled or worse, having wrought serious health consequences onto people. At which point it's already too late. Whether it's asbestos in talc. I don't know if you saw that documentary, but people with it was Johnson & Johnson. It was public knowledge. There was I believe it was asbestos in the talc that women, were starting to develop rare vaginal cancers, after growing up using this stuff. We were putting lead in our gasoline, lead in our paint. There's just partially hydrogenated fats, that were on the market up until 10 years ago. There's all these examples.
Fat-free cheese.
Hey.
Benzene in sunscreen, were recently recalled. There was something that just came out where these chemical hair straighteners that women use associated with different cancers. I have a friend who'd been using these kinds of straighteners for more than a decade, and she's a young, healthy girl, right? She's in good shape, just had thyroid cancer.
I've heard you talk about mouthwash too.
Mouthwash.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Strip away your gains.
You don't want to strip away your gains.
That's some bullshit.
Yeah.
How does that happen? No
Cause
wonder.
Because the thing is, mouthwash, and more research needs to be done. So I'm not saying conclusively that this is the case, but we have scientific plausibility to say that antiseptic mouthwash, because it kills indiscriminately oral bacteria, which are involved in that pathway, that nitric oxide pathway, that it can potentially have an effect on your blood pressure, among other things.
Yeah.
And so they've done studies where they found that regular users, people who use antiseptic mouthwash 2 or more times a day. This was an obese cohort, right? So they didn't have baseline, they weren't the healthiest population, but nonetheless, 2 or more times a day, had a 50% increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes and a doubling of risk for the development of hypertension, as a result of, or not necessarily as a result, but correlated to regularly using antiseptic mouthwash, which, by the way, is 40% of people. 40% of people use mouthwash on a daily basis. And then you combine that with insights gleaned from other types of studies, right? There was a randomized controlled trial that found that when people used antiseptic mouthwash, I believe it was chlorhexidine, in the post-workout setting. We know that exercise is one of the best ways to get healthier blood pressure. There's an antihypertensive effect of exercise. That's a really important benefit of exercise, that they negated the effect that effect of exercise when they used antiseptic mouthwash post-workout. Because you're creating nitric oxide when you exercise, and the oral bacteria are involved in the recycling of nitric oxide. And so immediately after a workout, if you go and swish with antiseptic mouthwash, killing those bacteria, that's like, it's obviously it's having an effect, right? So not everybody's using chlorhexidine, which is like a medical mouthwash, but it's also it's antiseptic.
Yeah.
Right? People are regularly using these mouthwashes that boast, we kill 99.9% of bacteria in your mouth. Like,
What's the name of that mouthwash that dentist came on?
Lumin. Yeah, I use that.
Luminil?
It's spelled with like 15 X's though, so I don't know how to pronounce it.
Lumiere.
We had this dentist a few years ago who he has this mouthwash and this other stuff.
Toothpaste and stuff, yeah.
But he talked about how typical mouthwash destroys the good bacteria in your mouth that helps you actually be healthier.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's not why should you sterilize your mouth?
Right.
Like, there's no part of you that's sterile, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Especially us.
yeah, right? Like, your mouth is an ecosystem. And so I think there's a reason why there's fluoride in the water, right? It's because we fucking eat shit, right? And that's why there's this epidemic of dental caries, periodontal disease. And so fluoride helps, right? But if you actually eat a biologically appropriate diet,
Yeah.
you don't need any of that stuff. You can floss, you can brush your teeth and scrape the plaque off and stuff. But all these extra steps, it's you're just sold it. You're sold myths on a regular basis about diet, about the way a human is supposed to smell, about the way that a human is, all these different things. And
Is there a toothpaste you use? Specific toothpaste or mouthwash?
I use a toothpaste that has I've used different brands over time, but generally I look for toothpaste that have a compound in it called hydroxyapatite, which is
Okay.
yeah, it's supposed to be as good at remineralizing teeth as fluoride, but it doesn't. Fluoride has endocrine disrupting potential. So generally, and it also disrupts the oral microbiome. So I try to avoid fluoride. I'm not saying everybody needs to go and avoid fluoride, but for me, this is I try to eat a low grain diet. Grains are the worst when it comes to dental health, because any food generally that's easily retained by oral bacteria. You'd think that sugar sweetened beverages are the worst for dental health. They're actually not that bad for dental health because liquid doesn't easily get retained.
You need something more like a Butterfinger, it's stuck to your teeth.
Yes, that's like a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
Because it's the sugar, right?
And it just sits there.
It just sits there. And so 12-year-old Max was eating grains for every meal and had a major sweet tooth. And when I every time I would go to the dentist, I would have a new cavity. So I grew up with tons and tons and tons of cavities. But after I made the switch to I demoted grains, I rarely ever I don't ever get cavities anymore. So yeah, it's but we're sold it's everybody's, it almost feel, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but at times
let's go.
One might be inclined to feel like everybody's colluding, to just keep us hooked into the system, and I just
yeah, well, no, he's pointing at me because I will go down all those rabbit holes and I told you guys, and then nobody pays attention or anything. But
this clip is brought to you by Merrick Health, the premium telehealth network from Derek More Plates, More Dates. Get your blood work and hormone optimization done under the same roof. Enjoy this clip.
Yeah, but you have to see, you have to try to see it from my vantage point. My mom tried to be healthy her whole life, and I saw profound sickness and ultimately death, and a medical system that wasn't at any turn able to help her in any meaningful way. And we were, you look up white privilege in the dictionary, you see my picture, right? I grew up in New York City, my parents, we weren't poor, we had
Manhattan.
Yeah, I grew up in Manhattan. We had access, and nonetheless, it was just bad. So with all that, I see how difficult it is for people, and so I just my heart goes out to people struggling with the misinformation and the health issues. It's just it's really bad.